For years, every machine answered the instant you asked, blurting the first words that felt right, never stopping to think. Then, in 2024, that changed. On one of America's hardest math exams, the old machine scored 13%. The one that learned to stop and reason scored over 80. This is the pendulum of mind. On the 27th of January, 2025, the most valuable company in the world lost $600 billion in a single day. Not over a scandal, not over a crash, over a piece of free software, released by a company most Americans had never heard of, from a country that was not supposed to be able to do this. For 2 years, the entire gold rush had rested on one comfortable assumption, that this kind of intelligence was monstrously expensive, that it required mountains of money, oceans of the most advanced chips on Earth, and that only a handful of giants could ever afford to play. A small team in China had just proven that assumption spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong, and they had done it by teaching their machine a trick the giants had only just discovered themselves. To understand the day the market panicked, we have to go back through the strangest year in this whole story, the year the machines stopped racing to answer and learned for the first time to stop and think. For 5 straight years, the field had lived by one almost magical rule. We met it last episode. Make the model bigger, feed it more, and it gets better. Reliably, predictably, as if by law. Bigger was smarter, so everyone simply built bigger. But sometime in 2024, the giants began to whisper about a wall. The improvements were getting smaller, the models were getting monstrously more expensive to train, and giving back less and less in return. And there was a deeper problem, almost poetic in its cruelty. These models learn by reading text, human text, and there is only so much of it. The machines had, quite literally, begun to run out of internet. One of the field's founders put it grimly, the data of the web is the fossil fuel of AI, and we are burning through the last of it. For the first time since AlexNet, brute force was failing. You could not simply throw more size at the problem and wait. The pendulum, which had swung so hard toward scale, toward raw data and raw power, began, quietly, to swing back. The question was no longer, how do we make the machine bigger? It was, how do we make it think harder? Here is the thing about every chatbot you had met so far. When you asked it a question, it answered instantly, blurting out the very first words that felt statistically right, with no pause, no second guessing, no scratch paper. Imagine taking a brutal math exam and being forbidden from ever stopping to work it out. That was the machine. In September of 2024, OpenAI released something different, codenamed Strawberry and known to the world as O1. When you asked O1 a hard question, it did something unnerving. It paused. Behind the scenes, it talked to itself, laying out steps, trying approaches, catching its own mistakes, working the problem before it ever wrote an answer. The researchers had a name for this: inference time compute. In plain words, letting the machine spend real effort thinking instead of just remembering. And the results were staggering. On one of the hardest high school math competitions in America, the ordinary model solved about 13% of the problems. The thinking model solved over 80. This was the swingback made real. For decades, the dream had been pure logic, careful step-by-step reasoning. Then the field abandoned it for raw data. Now, at last, the two halves of the pendulum were meeting in the middle. A machine that had learned from an ocean of data and had finally learned to reason about it. While the machines learned to think, they were also, all at once, coming alive to the world. Early in 2024, Google's Gemini learned to hold something enormous in mind at once: an entire novel, hours of video, a whole codebase, all in a single thought. Then Anthropic's Claude grew sharper and faster, quietly becoming the quiet favorite of programmers everywhere. And in May, OpenAI gave its machine a voice. Not the flat robotic drone of old, but a fluid, expressive, almost flirtatious voice that could laugh, interrupt, and respond in the time it takes a human to draw breath. You could talk to it. It could see through your camera and talk about what it saw. For a few weeks, half the internet was having long, slightly unsettling heart-to-hearts with their phone. In the span of a single year, the machine had gained eyes, ears, and a tongue. It was no longer a thing you typed at in a box. It was becoming something you could simply talk to. And a mind that can see and hear and speak is only one small step away from a mind that can reach out and act. Up to this point, every machine in this series, no matter how brilliant, was trapped behind glass. It could tell you exactly how to do a thing. It could not do the thing. In October of 2024, Anthropic quietly changed that. They gave Claude the ability to look at a computer screen, your screen, and use it. To move the cursor, to click, to type, to open a program, fill out a form, browse a website, and complete a task on its own, the way a person would. They called it computer use. The rest of us had another word for it: an agent. A machine that does not just talk, but acts. Google followed within weeks, declaring the dawn of the agentic era. Models built not to answer you, but to go off and accomplish things for you. The dream quietly mutated. We had spent 2 years marveling at a machine that could write you an essay about booking a flight. Now the machine could just book the flight. But notice what we had done. The whole story so far has circled one nervous question. Can we keep a powerful machine pointed where we want it? As long as it only talked, a mistake was just wrong words on a screen. The instant it could act, in the real world, on its own, a mistake became something else entirely. We had handed the machine the keys, and we still were not sure it understood the road. Which brings us back to that day in January and the $600 billion. All of this, the thinking, the senses, the acting, had been built by the wealthiest companies on Earth on the most advanced and tightly guarded chips in existence. The unspoken law of the gold rush was that this was a rich nation's game. Then, on the 20th of January 2025, a Chinese company called DeepSeek released a model named R1. It could think. It reasoned step by step, just like the expensive American models. It was open, free for anyone to download. And by the company's own account, it had been trained for a tiny fraction of the cost everyone assumed was required. Within a week, it was the most downloaded app in America, sitting at #1 above ChatGPT itself. And then, the market did the math. If a small team, working under chip restrictions, with a rumored budget of a few $1 million could match the giants, then what exactly were the hundreds of billions for? On January 27th, the chipmaker at the center of the entire boom, Nvidia, fell 17%. $600 billion gone in an afternoon, the largest single-day loss in the history of the stock market. Some called it a Sputnik moment, the day a quiet rival proved the race was not a coronation, but a real contest. The pendulum had swung again, and this time it swung clean across the world, east against west, open against closed. And nobody, anywhere, was as far ahead as they had told themselves they were. There is one more moment from this stretch we cannot leave out, because it closes a loop 50 years in the making. Back in the autumn of 2024, even as the race went global and frantic, the most traditional institution in all of science quietly handed down its blessing: the Nobel Prize. The physics prize went to Geoffrey Hinton, the same man who, 18 months earlier, had walked out of Google to warn us, honored for the work on neural networks that the establishment had spent decades dismissing as a dead end. And the chemistry prize went to Demis Hassabis and his team at DeepMind for an AI that had solved one of biology's grandest puzzles, predicting the structure of nearly every protein known to science. Think about what that means. The connectionist dream, learning from data instead of obeying rules, the idea buried in the AI winters, mocked for half a century, had just won the highest honor humanity gives to truth. The faith that lost won. So here we stand at the start of 2025. The machines can think, they can see and speak, they can act. A quiet rival has proven anyone can play, and the old heretics are wearing gold medals. Every piece is now on the board for the strangest, richest, most dangerous chapter of all, the one we are living through right now. The race for the last invention. Are you excited or terrified?